there is a natural force within the capitalist when there's no monopolies of competition being the accountability. So if you're a shitty boss, the employee in the capitalist system has the freedom to move to another company, work for a better boss. So that creates pressure on the employers and the bosses. That's at least the idea, that you there's two boundaries of you not misbehaving. One is the law, so regulations passed by the government, democratic, and the second is because there's always alternatives in theory, then that puts pressure on everyone to behave well because you can always leave. So, I mean, that's kinds of accountability. But what you're saying is that does not result in a significant enough accountability where the employer that avoids exploitation of the worker.
Absolutely. I mean, whatever accountability you get in those mechanisms, and let me respond to that, and then I'll the counter argument. First, competition. Here again, we have to be Hegelians just a little. Competition destroys itself. It doesn't need any out. The whole point of competition is to beat the other guy. If I can produce the same product as the other guy, either a better quality or a lower price or maybe both, then I win because the customers will come to me because my price is lower or my quality is better, and they'll leave the other guy. He'll go out of business. Now let's follow. When he goes out of business, because I won the competition, he fires his workers. I hire them because I'm now going to be able to serve a market he can't serve anymore. So I'm going to buy the used equipment. And thereby many become few. Monopoly is the product of competition. It's not the antithesis. It's the product.
Well, let's see.
That's where it comes from.
Well, there's another element to the system where there's always a new guy that comes in.
There isn't.
Well, that's the dream, the entrepreneurial spirit of a free, of the United States, for example, of a capitalist system is, you can be broke and one day have a strong idea and build up a business that takes on Google and Facebook and Twitter and all the different Ford, GM, which is what, you look at Tesla, for example, right? That's the American dream. One of the many ideals of the American dream is you can move from dirt poor to being the richest person in the world.
Right.
And
it can happen.
It can happen. But you know
what that's like? That's like you can win the lottery.
No, that's not quite. No, the lottery is complete luck. Here, you can work your ass off if you have a good idea.
The odds are better in the lottery.
That's not true. There's a lot of new businesses.
How many Teslas do you know?
Tesla's a really bad example because the car company, the automotive sector is so difficult to. They operate at such a thin margin of profit that they're probably a good example of like capitalism just completely coming to a halt in terms of lack of innovation, because that's a very complicated industry because of the supply chain. There's so much.
Come on, they have their uniquenesses. You're quite right, but so does every other industry. The one thing that's common is that many become few. What you can also have is when you have a few, they jack up the price. They make an enormous profit. And in the irony of capitalism, Marx would love this, they begin to incentivize people to break into this industry because the few remaining are making a wild amount of profit because they are a few and can jigger the market to make it work like that for them. So but the reason every small capitalist is trying to build market share. That's a polite way of saying they want to become a monopolist, or to be more exact, an oligopolist, one of a handful of firms that dominates. That's what they're there for.
But yeah, to push back a little bit also, because this is a question also. Do you think we're in danger of oversimplifying capitalism that completely removes the basic decency of human beings? So if you give me a choice to press a button to get rid of the competition, but that's going to lead to a lot of suffering. There's a lot of people at the heads of companies that won't press that button. That it's not in the calculation is not just money. It's human well-being too. So like
You think?
yes,
You and I don't live in the same place then.
So you're saying that the forces of capitalism take over the minds of the people at the top.
You got it.
And then they cease being human. Essentially,
No,
the basic. Okay,
I wouldn't go. I would. I mean,
depending on your model of humans,
yeah.
But they lose track of the better angels of their nature, and they just become cogs in the machine. But they just happen to be the cog.
I would
at the top.
put it differently. That the system is so set up. It's a little bit like natural selection. The guys who make, I could say the women too, it doesn't matter. The people who make it up through the layers of the bureaucracy and get to the top in these things have had to do things along the way that become selective. If they can't stand it because they have that human quality, and there are people like, I've known them, they're the ones running an Airbnb in Vermont. They went there and they said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to treat people like that. I'm going to make a lovely place in Vermont with my husband or my wife or whatever. And I'm going to be, enjoying the people that come by and be a decent human. Of course. But the system selects the firm. If you don't do what has to be done to make the profit go up, you're toast there anyway. The rest of the people who vote for you are going to kick you out. You can tell them all day long what a lovely person you are. Then they're going to look at you and wonder what happened to you. How did you even get this far with the lovely person horseshit?
But it's not okay. It's not necessarily just lovely person. So maybe I'll just say my bias is the people I know are especially at the top of companies, are in the tech sector,
right,
where innovation is such a big part of it. So I think a lot of the things we're talking about is when there's not much innovation in the system. So
innovation usually comes in the history of capitalism. Innovation comes in spurts. There's the electric period, the chemistry period, the nuclear period. There's now whatever you want to call it, the artificial intelligence or robotics or computer. It comes and then there's a flurry as everything is reorganized around whatever the newest technology is. And then you have a period where you can get excited about that. And the very rich people who come to the top can talk endlessly, as they always do, about innovation. Yeah. But again, it really is, this is a recurring kind of debate and a recurring kind of issue. For me, how do I put this in a way that, I don't mean to offend. So
yeah, please.
No, I don't want to. But the problem with capitalism is, and maybe you'll like this, the problem with capitalism is not that it is the one thing that's consistent with human nature. That's what its defenders would like to have us believe. But if anything, I would argue the opposite. That it is such a contradiction to parts of our nature, not other parts, that it can never quite make it. There's always going to be the people who don't go along with it, people you're talking about, who do quit along the way. Or maybe a few of them actually make it to the top by God knows what hook or what crook that they did it. But most of them go. And you know why? Because their humanity is contradicted by what it is they're being asked to do. I mean, the corporate sector this year, just to give you an idea, CEOs are jacking up their wage package. They're already out of whack. I mean, the average CEO pay is now 300 times what the average worker pay is. But they're jacking it up even more. Why? Because that's what's happening in their universe. That's what they're all doing it, and they have to do. Each one of them justifies that I have to do that, otherwise I'd lose my guy to the next one, which of course is true, but is no comfort for the mass of people who aren't CEOs, for whom this argument isn't very exciting. So they're doing that at a time when the American people can't cope. They've just gone through the COVID disaster. They've gone through the second worst economic crash of capitalism in our history. After 2 years of this 1-2 punch, they got an inflation, a third punch, and we are now predicting rising interest rates and a recession at the end of the year or early next year. You can't do this to a working class. When this was done to the German working class in the 1920s, Hitler was the result. You keep doing that in this country, we're already watching it. You're going to get that too. You're already getting bits and pieces. You can't keep doing it.
There's a quiet suffering amidst the working
Horror.
class that's growing.
Taking out on
That can turn to anger.
some little 18-year-old kid who has to go 3 hours in his car and blow away people in a supermarket. Huh? What? And it happens every day in this country. Every day.
So that anger rises up in those little ways now, and then bigger potentially.
By the way, there's one more thing on the rationality, and this goes to Elon Musk. If you're interested, 49,000 people were killed in automobile accidents this last year. The number was just released yesterday. 49,000. Automobiles are the single largest pollutant in the country. They use up an enormous amount of energy. They use up an enormous amount of resources. There is a way to make transportation much more rational, and we've known it for decades. It's called mass transportation. It's a really beautifully maintained, crystal clear, clean, frequent system of buses, trains, street trolleys, vans. It could easily be done in this society. In fact, I once did a project that I estimated cost $30 billion. That's less than we're sending to Ukraine to do this, to reconfigure it.
A public transit system where?
Everywhere in this country. All the major this country's overwhelmingly metropolitan area.
Well, it surely has to be more than 30 billion, but
well, it was a few years ago.
Okay, sure. But you're saying it's
but I'm using a lot of
that's insane.
Right, it's not crazy stuff.
It's a reasonable number.
Right.
Hey, listen, but there's
let me just finish the point.
Sure, yes.
Okay. So I'm trying to be rational here. If we have a climate crisis, which everyone tells me we do, if it's got a lot to do with fossil fuels, which everybody tells me it has to do, and with the use of the fossil fuel, particularly for the automobile, then the solution to the problem would be mass transit. We're doing nothing to make that happen. Nothing.
Well, there's, you could argue that autonomous vehicles is a kind of public transit because it's going to be reusable vehicles. It will end, in theory, car ownership. So you just have a more kind of distributed public transit system.
If it happens, but you know that that's a side effect. His major goal, and the major goal of the other companies that are busy squeezing to get his share of the pie smaller, so they have some, Ford, General Motors, Toyota, all of them are making electric cars now. So what they've done is they've replaced the individual car with fossil fuel with another individual car.
Yeah.
That's fucking nuts.
Well,
what are you doing?
That's one of the things they're doing, but automation is also another one. But on the Elon side, there's also hilariously named Boring Company,
yes,
which is working on tunnels, which is actually expanding the flexibility you might have to start playing with ideas of public transit. Right. I think. Listen, I'm now partially living in Austin, Texas, that I don't know if they know what a public transit system is, period.
Yes.
There's
most American
pickup trucks.
Yeah.
This is an interesting, so
by the way, footnote, the older this city, the more likely it has public transportation.
So you're saying
Boston is the best example.
Yes.
Have you been?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I have a place in Boston.
Boston with the street railway. Boston is your case study of how to do this because they've been doing it all along. New York's pretty good too.
There's a trade-off. Yeah, New York, I would say, is better than Boston because there's their technology also helps you out to do the public transit better. It's almost like Boston's a little too old, but yes, I get your point.